The girl from beyond the border. The biting wind carried the scent of pine, and an unusual unease as the border patrol stumbled upon her. She stood silhouetted against the stark, snow-dusted landscape, a wisp of a figure amidst the gnarled winter trees. The guards, hardened veterans of countless skirmishes, felt a prickle of something cold and unfamiliar at the base of their spines. It wasn't the usual fear of an enemy scout. It was a deeper, more primal dread. Her eyes, the color of twilight, met theirs without a flicker of surprise or apprehension. She was simply there. No tracks led to her, no sign of passage through the treacherous mountain pass. "Who are you?" one of the guards finally managed, his voice rougher than intended. She remained silent, her gaze unblinking. Her cloak, a rough-spun grey, seemed to absorb the minimal light, in making her appear almost spectral. There was no defiance in her stillness, only a profound sense of observation. The guards exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't a spy. A spy would fight, would plead, would attempt escape. This girl simply existed, emanating an unnerving calm. They eventually apprehended her, their hands surprisingly tentative as they bound her wrists. The metal felt cold against her skin, but she offered no resistance. As they led her back towards the stronghold, the air around them seemed to thicken, heavy with unspoken questions. The guards whispered among themselves, their usual bravado replaced by a nervous caution. They had never encountered anything like her. Word of the strange captive reached Alpha King Kyle as he presided over a meeting of his war council. Lord Valerius, his sternest advisor, was detailing the latest skirmishes with the mountain clans. Kyle listened, his gaze fixed on the flickering hearthfire, his mind already restless. When the captain of the border patrol, a man whose courage was legendary, entered the hall, looking pale and unnerved, Kyle felt a shift in the room's energy. "Alpha King," the captain began, his voice strained, "we've captured someone at the northern border, a girl." Kyle raised an eyebrow. "A girl? A scout, then? Bring her forth." The captain hesitated. "She's different, my king. No markings, no weapons. She speaks no tongue we know, and yet she understands." Intrigued, Kale dismissed the council, though Lord Valerius lingered, a frown etched deeply on his face. Moments later, Ilara was led into the throne room. The guards kept an unusual distance, their weapons still clutched tightly. In Kale's eyes, sharp and assessing, swept over her. She was slender, almost ethereal, with hair the color of rich earth falling in soft waves around her face. Her grey cloak, though simple, seemed to cling to her with an odd grace, but it was her eyes that truly captured him. Deep, ancient pools that seemed to hold the secrets of forgotten stars. There was no fear there, no cunning, only a quiet, unnerving awareness. "You stand before Alpha King Kale," Lord Valerius announced, his voice booming in the sudden silence. "State your name and purpose." Ilara's gaze, steady and unwavering, remained fixed on Kyle. She didn't flinch, didn't speak. It was as if she were communicating on a different plane, her silence louder than any words. Kyle felt an unbidden pull, a strange curiosity that defied his logical mind. He had seen countless prisoners, spies, and supplicants. None had ever evoked such a reaction. He rose from his throne, a powerful, imposing figure, and descended the steps, stopping a few feet from her. The guards tensed. Lord Valerius cleared his throat, a warning implicit in the sound. But Kale ignored them all. He extended a hand, palm open, a gesture of peace. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice a low rumble, devoid of threat. Ilara's eyes, those incredible eyes, softened almost imperceptibly. A flicker of something profound passed between them, a silent recognition that bypassed language and custom. She still didn't speak, but her gaze was a direct response, a promise of a story yet untold. "She is a threat, my king." Lord Valerius interjected, his voice edged with urgency. "Her presence is unnatural. We know nothing of her origins, of her intentions. She could be a sorceress, a harbinger of ill omen." Kyle barely spared Valerius a glance. His focus remained on Ilara. He saw no malice in her, no trickery, only a quiet strength, an unyielding spirit. "She is no sorceress," he stated, his voice ringing with absolute certainty, "and she will not be harmed." He turned to the captain. "Release her bonds. She will be housed within the castle, under my personal watch." A collective gasp rippled through the few remaining guards. Lord Valerius's jaw tightened. "My king, this is madness. To bring an unknown entity into our very home, it sets a dangerous precedent. She should be interrogated, imprisoned at the very least." Kyle turned, his eyes now cold and unyielding as they met Valerius's. "My decision is made, Lord Valerius. I sense no deception in her. Her presence is unique, yes, but not malicious. She will be given quarters in the West Tower. Inform the staff that she is to be treated with respect and her needs attended to. And no one, I repeat, no one, is to approach her without my express permission." Valerius bowed stiffly, his face a mask of disapproval. The guards exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unsettled by Cale's command. Yet no one dared defy him. Cale watched as the captain, still looking bewildered, approached Ilara and unfastened her bindings. Her wrists, though red from the ropes, showed no sign of chafing or injury. She simply rubbed them gently, her gaze still on Cale. As she was led away, Cale felt a strange mix of apprehension and exhilaration. He had made a decision that would undoubtedly cause unrest among his court, a choice based not on logic or precedent, but on an inexplicable intuition. He knew Lord Valerius would voice his concerns, and the whispers would begin. But as he watched her disappear down the corridor, a quiet conviction settled within him. There was something profoundly significant about the girl from beyond the border, and he, Alpha King Kyle, was determined to uncover her truth. Whispers and riddles, the scent of beeswax polish and old parchment hung in the air of Ilara's chambers, a stark contrast to the sterile chill of the border outpost. Kyle found himself drawn there almost daily. A silent, magnetic pull he couldn't quite articulate. He'd arrive, often after hours spent poring over dispatches, to find her seated by the window, her gaze fixed on the castle gardens below, an unreadable expression on her face. He'd tried direct questions, of course. "Where do you come from, Ilara?" He'd asked on his second visit, his voice a low rumble. She'd merely tilted her head, her unsettling eyes, the colour of twilight skies, meeting his. "From where the sun first kisses the mountains, and the wind whispers forgotten names," she'd replied, her voice soft as rustling leaves. Another time, he pressed, "What is your purpose here?" She'd smiled then, a faint, almost imperceptible curve of her lips. "To see what blooms in the shadow of a king's doubt." Each interaction left him more intrigued, more frustrated, and undeniably more captivated. He found himself lingering, watching the way her delicate fingers traced patterns on the cool stone sill, the subtle shifts in the light reflecting in her deep eyes. There was a quiet strength about her, an undeniable presence that belied her slender frame. One afternoon, a week after her arrival, Kyle spoke of a recent skirmish with raiders near the ancient forest, a common occurrence. They vanished into the dense undergrowth as if the trees themselves swallowed them whole. He grumbled, frustrated by their elusiveness. Ilara, who had been idly braiding a length of crimson ribbon, paused, Perhaps they followed the hidden path. Alpha King, she murmured, her voice a ripple of sound. Kyle frowned. Hidden path? There are no hidden paths in that part of the forest, only treacherous ravines and a labyrinth of roots. Ilara looked up, her gaze direct. There is a deer trail, overgrown now, that skirts the eastern ridge. It leads to a cave, long forgotten, where the roots of the ancient ones grow deep into the earth. It is known only to those who listen to the whispers of the oldest trees. Kyle felt a prickle of unease, then a surge of curiosity. How could she, a stranger, know of such a detail, one even his seasoned scouts were unaware of? He dismissed the thought for the moment, unwilling to acknowledge the growing unease alongside his fascination. He merely nodded, filing the information away. As his visits became a routine, so too did the murmurings in the court. Whispers followed him through the great hall. Hushed conversations ceased abruptly at his approach. The most vocal of his critics, Lord Valerius, sought him out in his study one evening, his usually placid expression etched with concern. "My king," Valerius began, his voice tight. "The court is troubled." He stood rigidly before Kyle's massive oak desk, his hands clasped behind his back. Kyle sighed, leaning back in his chair, the leather groaning in protest. Troubled by what, Valerius? The harvest? The southern border? By the girl, my king, Valerius stated, his eyes unwavering. Ilara. Her presence here, unvetted, unexamined, is a blight on your judgment. The rumors, they grow wilder with each passing day. Some speak of dark magic, others of a spy sent to undermine your rule. She is neither, Kale said, his voice hardening, a protective instinct he hadn't known he possessed flaring within him. She is a girl, alone, and lost, Valerius scoffed, a rare display of disrespect. Lost! My king! She speaks in riddles, knows things she shouldn't, and arrived without a trace. This is not a lost girl. This is a danger you refuse to see. Your continued proximity to her only fuels these fears. It undermines your authority, sows dissent amongst your loyal subjects. Kyle pushed himself to his feet, walking to the window that overlooked the moonlit courtyard. My authority is not so fragile, Valerius, and my decisions are my own. Indeed they are, my king, Valerius replied, his voice laced with uncharacteristic fervour. But when those decisions threaten the stability of the kingdom, it is my duty to speak. Your protection of this girl, it borders on obsession. What hold does she have over you? Kyle turned, his jaw tight. She has no hold. I follow my intuition, Valerius, and it tells me she is not a threat. He met his advisor's gaze, a silent challenge passing between them. Valerius held his ground for a moment longer, then bowed stiffly. As you command, my king. But mark my words, the whispers will not fade. They will only grow louder, endure until they threaten to drown out the voice of reason itself. With that dire warning, he departed, leaving Kyle alone in the echoing silence of his study, the weight of his advisor's words pressing down on him. He knew Valerius was right about one thing. The court's suspicion was a rising tide, threatening to engulf them both. Yet, when he thought of Ilara's quiet presence, her enigmatic smiles, and those knowing eyes, he felt a pull stronger than any fear. Unsettling knowledge. The air thickened with an uncharacteristic humidity, pressing down on the castle grounds like a damp blanket. Kyle, observing the darkening horizon from his study window, felt a familiar prickle of unease. Yet Ilara, seated by the hearth, seemed entirely unperturbed. She had been humming softly to herself, a melody Kale couldn't place. A strange, lilting tune that felt ancient and new all at once. A storm approaches, Kyle noted, more to himself than to her. Ilara merely smiled, a knowing glint in her eyes. It will break before dawn. A cleansing rain, they called it, long ago. Her gaze drifted to the flickering flames. The wind will howl like a mournful wolf, but the morning will be clear. Kyle frowned, a flicker of irritation mixing with his persistent curiosity. How could she speak with such certainty? The royal meteorologists, lauded for their accurate predictions, had merely hinted at a possibility of rain, not a guaranteed downpour before dawn. He'd learned to dismiss her cryptic utterances, yet a small part of him always paid heed. He remembered the time she'd predicted the unusually early bloom of the rare frost-kissed lilies in the shadowed valley, as a detail only the oldest herbalists knew, and usually only after the fact. Later that evening, as the first fat drops splattered against the castle's ancient stones, Kyle found himself drawn to her chambers. He stood outside, listening, not intending to intrude, but rather to observe. Her voice, carrying through the thick oak door, was soft, almost a whisper, singing a lullaby. It was a melody Kyle had never heard, yet it resonated with an oddly familiar ache in his chest. It spoke of silvered moons and slumbering mountains, of starlight woven into dreams. He knew, with an unsettling certainty, that it was a song from a forgotten era, a lullaby whispered by mothers to children whose names had long since faded from history. His own mother, a keeper of ancient lore and songs, had never known this one. More a rustle from the shadows at the end of the corridor snapped him from his reverie. Kyle's senses, honed by years of ruling and defending, immediately pinpointed the intruder. Lord Valerius. The king moved with a predator's silent grace, melting into the deeper shadows near Elara's door. Valerius, his usually proud bearing somewhat diminished by his furtive movements, crept towards Elara's room. His hand, a moment later, was on the ornate door handle, testing it. Kyle saw the flicker of a small, intricate lock-picking tool in his other hand. The king's blood ran cold. "Valerius!" Kyle's voice, a low growl, ripped through the hushed corridor. It was not a question, but a condemnation. Valerius stiffened, dropping the tool with a faint clatter that seemed deafening in the sudden silence. He spun around, his face paling to an ashen grey as he beheld Kyle, who now stood fully revealed, his expression a mask of chilling fury. "My king!" Valerius stammered, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. I was merely ensuring the lady's security. There have been rumours, whispers, Lord Valerius, that you have been cultivating," Kale interrupted, his voice dangerously soft, each word a hammer blow. He advanced slowly, his presence radiating a palpable menace. "You would violate the privacy of a guest under my protection, in my own castle." Valerius swallowed hard, his gaze darting to the closed door of Elara's room, then back to Kale's unyielding face. "Your Majesty, with all due respect, this woman is a danger. Her origins are unknown, her knowledge unnatural. The court speaks of little else. Your authority is being undermined. I was simply trying to ascertain the truth, for the good of the kingdom, for your good." Kyle stopped barely a foot from Valerius, towering over him. The air thrummed with Kyle's barely restrained rage. "The good of the kingdom? Or the satisfaction of your own suspicion, Valerius? I have given Elara my word. She is under my direct protection. To attempt to breach her chambers, to spy on her, is to question my judgment, to defy my command. Is that clear?" Valerius recoiled slightly, his defiance crumbling under the weight of Kyle's fury. "It is, Your Majesty. Forgive me. My zeal overstepped its bounds." Kale stared at him, his eyes burning with an intensity that promised severe repercussions. "I will not tolerate insubordination, Valerius. Not where Elara is concerned. Consider this your final warning. In any further attempts to undermine my decisions or to harm Elara in any way will be met with the full force of my displeasure. And believe me, you do not wish to experience that." Valerius bowed deeply, his face a picture of forced humility. "Understood, Your Majesty." As Valerius retreated, Kyle watched him go, his anger slowly coiling back into a simmering protectiveness. The king knew that this incident would only fuel Valerius's resentment, and by extension, the court's. But in that moment, standing before Elara's closed door, with the faint melody of her forgotten lullaby still echoing in his mind, Cale knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever secrets Elara held, whatever danger she represented to his court, she was his to protect. And he would guard her with the same fierceness he guarded his throne. The shadows on the horizon. The crisp morning air usually carried with it the scent of pine and damp earth, but today a different current permeated the castle, one of unease. King Kyle sat in council, the faces around the polished oak table grim. Reports from the northern garrisons painted a stark picture. Skirmishes were increasing, raiding parties growing bolder, and the insignia of the rival kingdom of Solara was seen with unsettling frequency near the border passes. "They grow confident," Lord Gareth boomed, slamming a fist onto the table, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. "Bold as brass, they are since this recent shift." His gaze, along with several others, drifted pointedly towards the empty chair beside Cale, reserved for Elara. Cale's jaw tightened. He knew what they implied. The sudden increase in aggression coincided, in their superstitious minds, with Elara's arrival. A chill, they called her, a harbinger. "Correlation does not imply causation, Lord Gareth," Cale stated, his voice a low rumble that instantly silenced further murmurs. "The Solaran king has long coveted our western forests. This aggression is an escalation of a pre-existing ambition, nothing more." Lord Valerius, pale and thin-lipped after his recent confrontation with Kyle, cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Your Majesty, the timing is peculiar. And her presence here, a woman of unknown origins, with knowledge that defies reason, only serves to embolden our enemies who perceive weakness, or sorcery within our walls." His eyes, like flint, flickered to Coil, a challenge simmering beneath his carefully neutral tone. Where vein throbbed in Cale's temple. He understood their fear, their superstition. Elara was an anomaly, a disruption to their ordered world. Yet the conviction that she was a threat to his kingdom felt entirely misplaced. He had seen the terror in her eyes, the quiet dignity, the unusual calm. "My decisions stand," Cale declared, his voice cutting through the rising tension. "Elara remains under my protection. Any further discussion on this matter is closed. Our focus is on the Solaran threat. Lord Valerius, you will oversee the deployment of the western patrols. Lord Gareth, prepare the eastern defences. We will not be caught unawares." The council adjourned, leaving Kyle with a simmering frustration. He dismissed his guards, seeking the quiet solitude of his study. Yet, even there, the whispers of the court seemed to penetrate, on a subtle pressure against his resolve. He found himself walking towards Elara's chambers, a familiar pull drawing him to her. Perhaps it was the need for a moment of peace, or perhaps a desire to quell the nagging doubts the council had stirred. He found her not in her usual seat by the window, but hunched over a large parchment spread across the low table, a piece of charcoal clutched in her delicate fingers. She was so engrossed that she didn't hear him enter, the soft scratching of charcoal the only sound in the room. Cale paused, watching her. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, a stray lock of dark hair falling across her face. As he drew closer, his breath hitched. The parchment wasn't a simple sketch, but a remarkably detailed map, not of the castle, nor the immediate lands, but of hidden mountain passes, forgotten valleys, and ancient ruins deep within the forbidden territories of the kingdom. Places even Cale, with his vast knowledge of the realm, knew only from obscure, centuries-old texts kept under lock and key in the royal archives. His heart hammered against his ribs, a mixture of awe and trepidation washing over him. The lines she drew were precise, the topographical features rendered with an accuracy that suggested intimate familiarity. She even marked what appeared to be ancient spring lines and forgotten pathways. "Ilara?" he finally murmured, his voice rough. She started, charcoal skittering across the parchment. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with a flicker of panic before they settled into their usual serene expression. She quickly attempted to cover the map with her hand, but it was too late. Kyle had seen enough. "What is this?" he asked, his voice devoid of anger, replaced by a deep, unsettling curiosity. He knelt beside the table, gently moving her hand away to reveal the full extent of her work. Ilara's gaze met his, unwavering. There was no fear, no guilt, only a profound stillness. "A remembrance," she whispered, her voice soft, almost ethereal, "of places that once were, and paths that still remain, though few remember them now." Kyle traced a finger along a jagged mountain range, then to a small, isolated valley marked with an unfamiliar symbol. "This valley," he said, his voice barely audible. "It is rumored to hold the ancient spring of Erith. A myth, most believe." Ilara merely nodded, her eyes distant, as if seeing not the parchment, but the very landscape itself. "It is no myth, Your Majesty. It holds a power few understand, a power that could be crucial." Crucial. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Kyle straightened, his mind reeling. How could she know these things? The court's accusations, Valerius's suspicions, suddenly didn't seem so outlandish. A deep worry began to coil in his gut, a cold dread that went beyond the Solaran threat. Ilara was more than just a girl with strange knowledge. She was a living enigma, and her secrets, he was beginning to realize, might very well unravel his entire kingdom. A dangerous alliance, the sealed missive, delivered by a breathless scout, felt cold and venomous in Kyle's hand. He broke the wax seal with a grim snap, the parchment crackling under his touch. The script within was sharp, angular, and anonymous, yet its message resonated with the whispers he'd already felt circling Ilara. "The witch you shelter brings ruin, will not succor. Cast her out, or witness your kingdom bleed for her sorceries." Kyle's jaw tightened, a vein throbbing in his temple. Fear, a cold serpent, coiled in his gut, not for himself, but for Ilara. The court's animosity was a growing tide, and this letter was merely a ripple before the tsunami. He crushed the letter in his fist, its edges biting into his palm. He needed to speak with her, to understand the depths of her knowledge and the true source of such fervent hatred. He found her later that evening in the garden, a small enclosed space within the castle walls, typically quiet even in the daytime. Tonight, a tempest brewed outside, the wind howling like a banshee through the battlements, rattling the window panes of the royal chambers. Rain lashed against the ancient stones, saw a rhythmic drumming that drowned out the distant sounds of the city. Yet, Ilara sat on a stone bench, seemingly oblivious to the chaos. She hummed a melody Kyle had never heard, an ancient lullaby that spoke of moonlit forests and forgotten stars. Her fingers traced patterns on a small, smooth riverstone she held, her expression serene. "Ilara." Kyle's voice cut through the storm's din, sharper than he intended. She looked up, her eyes, the color of twilight, reflecting the flickering lamplight from the archway. "My king," she replied, her voice soft, unperturbed by the tempest raging both within and outside the castle. He moved closer, the crushed letter still a ghost in his palm. "The Solaran forces are pressing hard," he began, omitting the letter's contents for now. "Lord Valerius predicts they will attempt a flanking maneuver through the Whispering Pass by dawn." Ilara's gaze drifted past him, seemingly into the storm-darkened sky. "The Whispering Pass is a fool's errand for them," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the wind. "The northern approach to the Whisperwood, however—" She paused, her brow furrowing. "There is an old trail, seldom used, overgrown now. It cuts through the densest part of the wood, emerges behind the Solaran encampment at Blackfen. If your scouts were to clear it, silently, and your archers position themselves—" She trailed off, looking at him with an unnerving intensity. "They will be exposed, my king. A surprise attack there would shatter their morale." Kale stared at her, a knot forming in his stomach. The Whispering Pass was a well-known strategic point, and Valerius's prediction was sound enough. But the Whisperwood Trail, it was a forgotten path, used only by poachers decades ago, deemed too treacherous and overgrown for troop movement. How could she possibly know of it, let alone its strategic potential? Yet, a flicker of intuition, cold and undeniable, urged him to consider her words. The following morning, against Valerius's vehement objections and the open skepticism of his council, Kale dispatched a small, elite contingent of scouts and archers along the Whisperwood Trail. Valerius, his face a mask of barely concealed fury, seethed. "This is madness, your majesty. She's bewitched you. You risk the lives of good men on the ravings of a sorceress." Kyle's stare was glacial. "My orders are final, Valerius. See to the defense of the Whispering Pass as planned, and I warn you, Lord, your insolence grows wearisome." Hours later, as the morning sun began to pierce through the retreating storm clouds, a frantic rider galloped into the castle courtyard. His report, delivered in gasps, sent a ripple of shock and disbelief through the assembled court. The Solaran forces, indeed, had attempted to move through the Whisperwood. They had been ambushed, not at the Whispering Pass, but at the very point Ilara had indicated. The surprise attack had decimated their vanguard, scattering the rest in disarray. The Solaran advance had been severely crippled, their morale shattered. A stunned silence descended upon the council chamber. Valerius's face, usually ruddy, was ashen. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his gaze darting to Ilara, who stood by Kale's side, her expression unreadable. The victory was undeniable, into a strategic masterstroke that had turned the tide in Kale's favor. Yet, it had come from the most unexpected, and to many, the most dangerous source. The court was now openly divided, whispers of sorcery and dark alliances growing louder, more insistent. Kyle felt their resentment like a physical weight, but a new resolve hardened his gaze. He had chosen a path, and he would see it through, no matter the cost. His fascination with Ilara had deepened into something far more dangerous: dependence. The court's fury. The victory over the Solaran forces, rather than solidifying Kale's position, had ignited a wildfire of dissent within the court. The whispers had grown into shouts, the veiled accusations ripped open into declarations. Kyle stood before a sea of furious faces, their anger a palpable heat pressing in on him. Lord Valerius, seeing his face a mask of scarlet fury, pounded a fist on the polished oak table. "My king! This woman—" Valerius spat the word like a venomous dart, gesturing wildly towards Ilara, who stood beside Kale, her expression unnervingly serene amidst the storm. Her insight is nothing short of dark sorcery. You risk the very soul of Aerthos for a witch's cunning. A chorus of assent erupted, a cacophony of shouts and stamping feet. "Witch!" one lord bellowed, his voice raw with fear and prejudice. "She has blinded our king!" Another cried, echoed by a dozen more. Kyle's jaw tightened, his hand instinctively resting on the hilt of his blade, a silent warning to the emboldened assembly. He felt the familiar surge of protectiveness for Alara, a fierce, almost primal instinct that warred with the clamour of his own council. Alara, however, it remained unperturbed. Her gaze drifted over the enraged faces, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. It was this calm, this unflappable composure in the face of such hostility that truly unnerved Kael's court, confirming their darkest suspicions. She seemed to draw power from their fear, a silent, unyielding monument in the heart of the tempest. "You would question your king's judgment." Kael's voice, though calm, cut through the din like a honed blade. "You would forget the Solaran forces driven back, the lives spared, the borders secured. All thanks to the very council you now condemn." "It was a fluke, a devil's bargain," Valerius roared, his voice hoarse. "Do you not see, my king? Her knowledge is unnatural. She knows things no mortal could, things hidden for centuries. The spring of Aerith, the forgotten trails. She weaves a spell around you, charming you with forbidden lore." The accusation hung heavy in the air, a bell tolling for Kyle's authority. He looked at Alara, her eyes, deep as ancient forests, met his. There was no fear there, only an intriguing blend of patience and a subtle, knowing amusement. It was as if she had anticipated this, as if the court's fury was merely a predictable current in a much larger, unseen tide. Later that evening, the castle still thrumming with the lingering echoes of the court's rebellion, Kyle led Alara down a rarely used spiral staircase. The air grew cooler, dust motes dancing in the narrow shafts of moonlight, filtering through grimy arrow slits. The stone steps, worn smooth by countless forgotten footsteps, descended into the castle's deeper, older foundations. "To where are we going?" Alara's voice was a soft murmur, cutting through the oppressive silence. "Somewhere quiet," Kyle replied, his voice gruff, his mind still reeling from the day's confrontation. He pushed open a heavy, iron-bound door, revealing a vast, circular chamber. Rows upon rows of ancient tomes lined the walls, their leather bindings cracked and brittle, their pages yellowed with age. The air hummed with the scent of old paper and dried ink. This was his hidden library, a sanctuary he'd kept secret even from most of his advisors. Alara gasped softly, her composure finally faltering, replaced by a look of genuine awe. Her fingers traced the spine of a particularly thick volume, her eyes alight with a hunger Kyle hadn't seen before. He watched her, a knot of conflicting emotions tightening in his chest. His court's accusations still rang in his ears, chilling him with their vehemence. Yet, seeing her here, surrounded by the echoes of forgotten wisdom, a different truth resonated within him. He was drawn to her, undeniably, inextricably. It wasn't just her strategic brilliance or her unsettling knowledge. It was something far deeper, a pull that defied logic and reason. "They call you a witch," Kyle said, his voice barely a whisper, turning to face her. The faint light from a single flickering lantern cast long shadows that danced across their faces. "They say you've bewitched me." Alara turned, her gaze steady, unwavering. "And do you believe them, Kael?" He took a step closer, then another, until he stood before her, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her. Her presence was a balm to the chaos of his day, a quiet comfort he hadn't realized he craved. The court's fury, Valerius's outrage, the very stability of his kingdom. All seemed distant, irrelevant, in the intimate hush of the library. I don't know what to believe, he admitted, his voice rough with an honesty that surprised even himself. But I know this. When I am with you, the world makes more sense. When you speak, I listen. And when they threaten you. He reached out, his hand hovering inches from her face, his thumb brushing lightly against her cheekbone. I want to burn them all. Her eyes widened, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. The tension between them was a taut, humming wire, charged with unspoken desires and dangerous truths. Kyle knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified him, that his connection to Elara was no longer just about strategy or survival. It was something far more profound, something that threatened to unravel the very fabric of his carefully constructed world. And he was beginning to realize, with a terrifying clarity, that he didn't care. He would protect her, no matter the cost. Breaching the walls. A guttural roar, followed by the splintering crack of ancient stone, tore through the fragile quiet of Coil's library. The very foundations of the castle vibrated, sending a cascade of dust motes dancing in the shafts of light, filtering through the high, arched windows. Kyle, still reeling from his confession, instinctively pulled Elara closer, shielding her with his body as another, closer impact rattled the chamber. The rhythmic thud of a battering ram, once a distant echo of war, was now a visceral percussion against the castle's outer walls. "They've breached the first gate," Elara murmured, her voice unnervingly calm amidst the growing clamour. She didn't flinch, didn't tremble. Her gaze, usually so searching, was now fixed on a point beyond the stone. Kyle felt a tremor, not of fear but of an inexplicable certainty, ripple through her. "Stay close," Kyle commanded, his hand instinctively finding the hilt of his sword. The steel felt cold and familiar against his palm. His mind, moments ago consumed by the tumultuous currents of his heart, now snapped into the sharp focus of a king at war. The court, Valerius, their accusations, it all faded into background noise against the immediate threat. His singular priority, stark and unyielding, was Elara. Through the heavy oak door, the sounds of battle intensified, the clash of steel, the shouts of men, the high-pitched screams of the dying, smoke, acrid and biting, began to snake its way under the door, a grim herald of the chaos consuming his home. Kyle knew the castle's defenses were formidable, but the sheer force of this assault felt different, more coordinated, more relentless than any previous skirmish. This was not a raid. It was an invasion. "We can't stay here," Kyle gritted, pulling Elara towards a tapestry-covered section of the wall. Behind it lay a narrow, concealed passage known only to the royal line and a handful of trusted guards. It was a route for escape, not for battle, but with the enemy already inside the outer baileys, conventional exits would be suicide. As Cale fumbled with the hidden latch, Elara's hand, cool and steady, closed over his. "Wait," she whispered, her eyes narrowing. "Not that way. Not yet." A flicker of annoyance, quickly suppressed, crossed Cale's face. He was the king, the battle-hardened warrior, yet she was dictating their movements. But then he saw it, a subtle shift in her expression, a barely perceptible tension in her jaw. It was the same look she wore when she spoke of ancient knowledge, when her mind was deciphering patterns only she could perceive. "The Eastern Curtain Wall," she said, her voice low, almost a hum. "A breach. They're moving forces through the lower barracks, aiming for the main keep." She pointed, not at the wall, but at the empty air beyond. "They're coming from the north, too, along the old siege path. A diversion." Kyle stared at her. dumbfounded. How could she know? There was no window, no sound, or no indication of such movements within these thick stone walls. Yet, an instinct, raw and powerful, urged him to trust her. He had seen enough of her uncanny foresight to know it was not mere guesswork. "Show me," he said, his voice taut. Elara nodded, her grip on his arm firm. Instead of the hidden passage, she led him towards a different section of the library, deeper into its labyrinthine shelves. The air grew heavier here, laden with the scent of aged parchment and dust. She paused before a towering bookshelf, its contents forgotten by time, and ran her fingers along the spine of a massive, leather-bound tome. With a surprising push, she nudged the entire shelf inward, revealing a gap, barely wide enough for one person to squeeze through. Beyond it lay not a passage, but a cramped, dark space, leading to an even narrower, spiral staircase carved into the very heart of the castle's ancient stone. It was a servant's stair, forgotten and unused for centuries, leading down into the deeper, foundational levels. Carl had never known of its existence. "This will take us below the main keep, away from the immediate fighting," Elara explained, her voice a calm counterpoint to the distant roar of battle. "They won't expect us to go down." As they descended into the suffocating darkness, the sounds of the siege grew muffled, yet the tremors of impact continued to reverberate through the stone. Kyle moved with the practiced ease of a warrior, his hand on his sword, his senses alert. But it was Elara who guided him, her steps unfaltering, her hand a steady presence at his back, urging him forward through the unseen passages. He felt a primal shift in their dynamic. He was the king, the protector. But in this moment, in this echoing darkness, she was his compass, his guide through the rapidly crumbling world. The walls of his castle were falling, but Elara was showing him new paths, even if they led into the very depths of the earth. The Guardian's Power. The forgotten servant's stairwell, a dust-choked helix, reeked of damp stone and congealed fear. Kyle descended with a predator's fluid grace, his hand a constant anchor at Elara's back, guiding her deeper, away from the chaos above. The distant shriek of steel and the guttural roar of invaders still clawed at their ears, a brutal anthem to their desperate flight. He felt the tremor in the ancient steps, a vibration mirroring the castle's assault. "They'll anticipate us heading for the crypts," Kyle rumbled, his voice a low growl. "The old escape tunnels. They'll be fortified." Elara's grip on his arm tightened, surprisingly resolute. "No, they won't." Her voice was a calm counterpoint to the storm. "They know the main passages, not this." She gestured towards a narrow, crumbling arch, almost lost behind a century of cobwebs and debris. "Through here." Kyle hesitated, his instincts screaming caution. This archway plunged into an even darker, tighter passage, barely wide enough for one, let alone a man of his build. But Elara's conviction was absolute. He trusted her now, an unthinking, primal faith forged in the crucible of siege. He moved first, his broad shoulders scraping against the rough stone, clearing the way. The passage unfolded into a labyrinth of forgotten storerooms, strewn with shattered barrels and splintered crates. The air grew colder, and the silence heavier, punctuated only by their hurried breaths and the scuttling of unseen things. They burrowed deeper, the castle's foundations pressing in like a tomb of rock and shadow. Then, a sudden, sharp cry echoed from ahead, followed by the unmistakable metallic whisper of a drawn blade. "They found us!" Kyle snarled, yanking Elara behind him, his own sword already free, its polished steel catching the faint, ambient light. 3 figures materialized from the gloom, faces grim, armor emblazoned with the Northern clan's sigil. They moved with chilling efficiency, boxing them in the cramped space. "The king!" one bellowed, lunging, his axe arcing towards Kale's head. Kale met the blow with a clang that vibrated through the stone, parrying and countering with a swift thrust that found its mark. The man crumpled. But the other two pressed their advantage. Kyle fought with the raw ferocity of a cornered beast, a blur of steel and muscle in the dimness. He'd faced countless foes, but the confined space hampered his usual sweeping attacks, forcing him into a brutal, close-quarters struggle. He dispatched the second attacker with a savage upward slice, but as he pivoted to face the last man, a shadow detached itself from the wall. A fourth soldier, silent and lethal, had flanked them. The glint of a dagger. Kyle swung, but the space was too tight, the attacker too close, the blade aimed for Ilara's back. He roared, throwing himself forward, but he was too far. Then, a sudden, blinding flash erupted from Ilara. Not a flicker, but a shimmering, incandescent dome of light pulsed outward, repelling the attacking soldier with an unseen force. He was hurled backward, crashing into the stone wall with a sickening thud, his dagger clattering. The light intensified, forming a translucent, sapphire-hued shield that enveloped Ilara and Kyle, humming with otherworldly energy. Kyle stared, his breath catching, his sword momentarily forgotten. The shield rippled, deflecting arrows that now whizzed through the narrow passage from unseen archers further back. He felt the raw power emanating from Ilara, a cold, majestic energy that prickled his skin and resonated deep within his bones. Ilara stood at the shield's heart, her eyes fixed on Kyle's. They glowed with an ancient, knowing intensity, no longer merely human. Her lips, once soft, now seemed etched with timeless wisdom. "Kale," she said, her voice resonant, layered with echoes, as if many spoke through her. It was the same voice, yet utterly transformed, carrying the weight of ages. "I am not merely Ilara." The words hung in the air, heavy with revelation, as the shield pulsed around them, holding the encroaching darkness at bay. "I am a guardian," she continued, her gaze unwavering, meeting his shock with profound serenity. "One of the oldest. My purpose is tied to this land, to its pulse, its very survival, and to yours, Alpha King." The air crackled around them, a testament to the power now unbound. The invaders, momentarily stunned, began to gather, their faces a mixture of fear and awe, but they could not breach the shimmering barrier. Kale felt a tremor run through him, not of fear, but of an overwhelming, profound understanding. The mystery that had shrouded her, the unsettling knowledge, the uncanny foresight. It all coalesced into this single, stunning truth. She was not just a woman he loved. She was something far, far more. And her power, he realized, was only just beginning to unfold. A king's acceptance. Kyle stared at the shimmering sapphire shield, then at Ilara, whose face was etched with a mixture of exhaustion and fierce determination. The northern clan soldiers lay stunned, their weapons clattering uselessly on the stone. It wasn't just the raw power that pulsed from her, but the ancient resonance, a song in his very bones that had previously been a whisper, now a roaring anthem. This was no sorcery of shadows or dark pacts. This was the earth, the sky, the very essence of the land, distilled into the woman he held. A profound understanding settled over him, displacing the shock. It was a realization that went deeper than words, touching the primal core of his being. His relentless need to protect her, his unwavering faith despite the accusations, his irrational yearning for her presence. It wasn't just love. It was instinct, an ancient recognition of their intertwined destinies. She wasn't merely a woman he loved. She was the land's embodiment, a guardian, and somehow inextricably linked to his own survival, to the survival of his people. The pieces of the puzzle, scattered and perplexing, clicked into place with a sudden, irrefutable clarity. This wasn't a choice he'd made, but a truth that had been woven into the fabric of his existence long before he'd met her. He loved her, fiercely and without reservation, and that love was now irrevocably bound to the ancient power that coursed through her veins. "We have to go," Alara murmured, the shield wavering, to her eyes scanning the passage ahead. The distant sounds of battle still echoed, though muted by the thick stone. He nodded, his grip on her hand tightening, a silent promise passing between them. He would face any court, any accusation, any threat for her. They moved swiftly through the secret passages, the air growing colder as they ascended towards the main castle levels. When they finally emerged into the great hall, the chaos had subsided, replaced by a tense, eerie silence. The remaining members of his court, along with the victorious northern clan leaders, stood amidst the debris, a tableau of weary triumph and simmering suspicion. Lord Valerius, his face a mask of grim satisfaction and barely concealed triumph, stepped forward the moment Kael and Alara appeared. "Alpha King Kael, you return, and you bring the sorceress with you. As predicted, her dark magic has surely aided the invaders, paving their way." His voice boomed, thick with accusation, drawing all eyes to Alara. Kael met Valerius's gaze, unflinching. He knew this moment would come, but now, armed with the truth, a new resolve burned within him. He kept Alara at his side, his hand resting protectively on the small of her back. "Lord Valerius, you are quick to condemn. This woman," he began, his voice resonating with an authority that silenced the murmurs, "is not a sorceress of shadows. She is a guardian, a protector of this land, and she saved my life tonight, not once, but twice." A ripple of disbelief, then outrage, spread through the court. Valerius scoffed, a sneer twisting his lips. "A guardian? By what dark pact does she claim such a title? We saw her powers, King. Unnatural, blasphemous. Unnatural, perhaps, to those who have forgotten the ancient ways." Kael countered, his voice steady. "But not blasphemous. Her magic is of the earth, of the very essence of our home. It is a defense, a shield against those who would harm us." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, then turned to Alara. "Show them, Alara. Not with a weapon, but with the essence of what you are." Alara's gaze met his, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, but then a slow, knowing nod. She stepped forward, her hands rising. A soft sapphire glow began to emanate from her palms, not aggressive or threatening, but warm, almost inviting. It pulsed gently, expanding to fill the great hall with a comforting radiance that seemed to push back the lingering tension and the scent of battle. The light softened the harsh lines of the faces in the court, bathing them in a hue that felt ancient, profound. Lord Valerius watched, his jaw tight, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and reluctant awe. The sapphire light seemed to seep into the very stones of the castle, a quiet affirmation. It was a manifestation of power unlike any they had ever witnessed, devoid of malice, pure and inherent. "This is not the magic of a witch," Kael stated, his voice ringing with conviction. "This is the heartbeat of our world, made manifest. She is tied to us, to this land, to me." He took Alara's hand, the sapphire light intensifying around their joined fingers. To question her is to question the very foundation upon which our kingdom stands. Valerius's face was a study in internal conflict. He wanted to rail, to accuse, but the evidence of his own senses, the undeniable purity of the light, warred with his ingrained fear and suspicion. He looked from Alara to Kael, seeing not a king deluded, but a king connected, deeply and irrevocably. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of ages, he bowed his head, a gesture of unwilling yet undeniable acceptance. If this power truly serves the land, then let it be so. But the cost, Alpha King, the cost of this revelation remains to be seen. Kyle knew the cost would be immense, but looking at Alara, bathed in the soft, protective glow of her own essence, he also knew it was a price he would willingly pay. United for the future. The collective gasp that rippled through the great hall had been a potent thing, a mixture of fear and awe. Now, in its wake, an almost palpable quiet settled over the kingdom. Ilara, pale but resolute, had demonstrated a power so unlike the dark whispers of sorcery that Valerius's accusations had shriveled in the sudden, blinding light of truth. The earth had sung through her, a vibrant, uncorrupted symphony that left no room for doubt. Reluctant acceptance had etched itself onto the faces of the court, particularly Valerius, whose jaw remained stubbornly clenched even as the undeniable purity of her magic washed over them all. In the days that followed, the kingdom began a slow, deliberate mending. The tremors that had plagued the land had ceased, and a strange, revitalizing energy hummed beneath the soil. Fields that had withered began to show new shoots, and the river, recently sluggish and cloudy, now ran clear and strong. Kyle, with Ilara by his side, directed the rebuilding efforts. The damaged outer walls of the keep were reinforced with stone drawn from newly discovered quarries, their strength imbued with the silent promise of Ilara's presence. His people, once wary, now looked at her with a profound reverence. She walked among them, no longer a prisoner, but a revered protector, her steps light, her gaze clear. Children, once hushed and fearful, now openly approached her, offering wildflowers, their innocent trust a balm to the scars of suspicion she had borne. Ilara's exhaustion, a deep-seated weariness from her prolonged imprisonment and the draining display of her power, was evident, yet she never faltered. She spent hours in the fields, her bare feet connecting with the soil, her hands gently coaxing life back into barren patches. Kyle often found her there, a silent sentinel, nor watching her work with a quiet pride that swelled in his chest. He saw the way the land responded to her, a subtle shimmer in the air around her, a vibrancy that seemed to emanate from her very being. Their bond, forged in the crucible of suspicion and danger, now deepened into an unspoken understanding. Nights, once filled with Kyle's restless worry, were now spent in the quiet intimacy of shared dreams and whispered hopes. He would hold her, feeling the steady rhythm of her heart against his, a grounding force in a world that had threatened to unravel. Her touch, once a hesitant comfort, was now a vital necessity, a confirmation of their shared path. "The land remembers," Ilara murmured one evening, tracing patterns on Kale's arm as they sat by the hearth, the firelight dancing in her eyes. "It remembers us, Kale. It remembers its guardian, and its alpha." Kyle tightened his embrace, inhaling the scent of wood smoke and earth that clung to her. "And we remember it, Ilara. We will honor it. Together." Their vision for the future was clear, born from the recent chaos. No longer would the kingdom merely survive, it would thrive, intertwined with the living heart of the land, guided by Ilara's ancient wisdom and Kale's unwavering leadership. They discussed rebuilding not just structures, but trust, fostering not just crops, but a deeper connection between his people and the natural world. Valerius, though still stiff-backed and reserved, had begun to observe Ilara with a different sort of curiosity, a grudging respect, slowly replacing his initial hostility. He witnessed the undeniable healing she brought, the renewed vitality she breathed into the kingdom, and slowly, imperceptibly, his skepticism began to soften. One afternoon, Kyle found Alara at the edge of the Whispering Woods, a place once feared, now vibrant with new growth. She was speaking in soft tones to a sapling, her fingers brushing its tender leaves. "The future is uncertain, Kyle," she said, her voice carrying on the gentle breeze, "but we are united. That is our strength." He walked to her, placing his hand over hers on the sapling. "And our people will follow," he affirmed, looking out at the burgeoning landscape. "They see the truth now, Alara. They see you, not as a threat, but as their heart." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose. Kyle watched Alara, her silhouette framed by the deepening twilight. Duin felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. The trials had been arduous, the accusations sharp, but they had emerged stronger, their destinies irrevocably woven together. The kingdom, once fractured, was now whole, its future bright, with the promise of their combined strengths. Alara was not just his love. She was the living spirit of their world, and he, her alpha, was her protector, bound by love and destiny to safeguard her, and through her, their entire realm. The whispers of sorcery had been silenced, replaced by the clear song of the earth, a melody of hope and enduring strength that promised a future where Alara's power and Kale's rule would stand as one, an unbreakable shield against whatever storms lay ahead.